Sun cast a shadow, a digital line is coming over the mountain and over your mind. Double down your Bitcoin, hang on for the ride. We're moving into the future, one block at a time. We're moving into the future, one block at a time.
Welcome to Once Upon a Coin, documenting the ongoing history of blockchain and cryptocurrency. As always, I'm your storyteller, Jason Cassidy. Today's story is unlike anything else. We look at a lot of different topics on the show, and some of those topics are truly era-defining. So there may be no better example of this than when the world was introduced to a revolutionary form of crowdfunding, something that changed the investment landscape as we know it forever. This is the story of the ICO boom. Before we get too far, let's define a few things here. ICO stands for Initial Coin Offering, and it's the crypto world's answer to the stock market's IPO, which is Initial Public Offering. Simply put, an ICO is a way to debut a new cryptocurrency via a crowdfunding campaign where investors can get access to the coin or token before they hit the open markets via exchanges. This new form of decentralized financing really blew open the floodgates in the blockchain world, as prior to this, raising funds for a crypto project was pretty challenging. Traditional avenues of raising capital didn't work out too well in the early days of cryptocurrency because, for the most part, venture capitalists just weren't putting much money into it. It was just simply too risky and too small of a market for them to want to play in. Beyond that, early blockchain entrepreneurs didn't have the access to capital markets either, so for the most part, if they were going to be raising capital for a crypto project, they'd have to get really damn creative and/or lucky. And as usual, when we find ourselves between a rock and a hard place in crypto, as an industry, we almost always find a way to innovate our way out of it. And that's exactly what happened here. Yes, just like Mother Nature herself, crypto always just seems to find a way. The group that pioneered the ICO was none other than Mastercoin back in July of 2013. Founder J.R. Willett first introduced the Mastercoin project to the world via the Bitcoin Talk forum and laid out his master plan for it. No pun intended. This initially started with a request for donations from the Bitcoin community, given that Mastercoin was being built to leverage the Bitcoin blockchain itself. They were adding a new suite of features and utility to Bitcoin in the form of custom tokens, a decentralized exchange, distributed trading, and a lot more. In an effort to further motivate people to invest into his ambitious project, Willett told potential investors that he would be adding in a suite of features to the protocol that would only be accessible to people that actually owned Mastercoins. The plan worked, and the funds started pouring in, enough to allow the project to move forward with around 5,000 Bitcoin raised, or the equivalent of around $500,000 US. And years later, the Mastercoin project would actually be rebranded to the Omni layer, a name that it still operates under to this very day. Thus, we now have what would later be known as the world's first ever ICO, and with Mastercoin probably one of the world's first utility tokens as well. It would take a few years before this type of offering would really begin to run wild in the industry. However, with Mastercoin, the seeds were now planted, and those seeds began to take root in some really interesting ways. One of the first examples of this idea being taken seriously by others took place only a few months later when Nextcoin, or NXT, tried the idea out themselves in September of 2013. It worked, and while the amount of funds raised was pretty humble at 21 Bitcoin total, the point here is that it got the project rolling, and it more importantly served as a point of validation for this new emerging fundraising model. So far, the few attempts at pulling off at what soon would be known as an ICO were successful, albeit on a pretty small scale. Over the next year of action, several projects attempted their hand at the fundraising magic, with the numbers being raised creeping up a little bit more each time. Swarm was able to bring in a respectable $800,000 with their raise, while the MadeSafe project was able to smash that number with a total of $6 million raised in their efforts. But as fate would have it, this is all just an appetizer to the main course, because there was a project coming that would not only define the ICO model, they would end up triggering the advent of an entire new ecosystem within cryptocurrency itself. I'm talking about Ethereum. In early 2014, computer science student Vitalik Buterin announced to the world his vision for an alternative to Bitcoin, and everyone was welcome to join him. The sale, which was held later that summer, was a smashing success, raising 3,700 Bitcoin in the first 12 hours alone. And when all the dust had settled, Ethereum's ICO had raised an eye-popping $18.3 million US. Keep in mind, while this number is pretty low by today's standards, back then, a raise of this level was practically unheard of. Ethereum's ICO investors did incredibly well when we consider they paid a whopping 31 cents US per Ether, and the context here is that Ethereum's all-time high price was reached in late 2021 when it exceeded a value of $4,800 US per Ether. I'm not even going to try and do the math here because it's probably going to make my eyes water. However, suffice to say, anytime that you can take 31 cents US and turn it into $4,800, you're doing something right. Oddly enough, the inspiration behind the Ethereum name came to Vitalik one day when he was researching on Wikipedia and saw the word ether, and this triggered a flood of childhood memories around a science fiction book he had once read. The term ether hit home for him given its once assumed properties of being transparent, weightless, and frictionless. So, while the theory of ether was abandoned by scientists long ago once Albert Einstein's special theory of relativity was introduced at the turn of the 21st century, the concept of ether got to live on in a big way thanks to one Canadian computer science student. While this was very exciting to see a new way of funding a project take form, it really wasn't realistic for most people. You see, to launch a new cryptocurrency back in this time period meant you were going to be launching your own blockchain likely, and to launch your own blockchain was a lot of work. To accomplish this, you'd first have to settle on what type of consensus model you'd want your blockchain to use: proof of work, proof of stake, etc. You'd also have to create your own wallet and offer full support for it, in addition to ensuring you had enough full nodes operating on the network, plus monitoring the health of your network from the mining perspective, in addition to about 1 million other considerations. It is a lot of work and a unique set of responsibilities that I can speak to from experience, having managed several blockchains in the past. So for crypto to blossom the way that people really wanted crypto to blossom back then, it was clear that we were going to need a much faster, cheaper, and easier way for people to launch their own coin or token. And that's exactly what we got in 2015 when the ERC20 token standard was introduced. Developer Fabian Vogelsteller first proposed the idea as a way to help address the need for a token standard within smart contracts on Ethereum. This meant that all ERC-based 20 tokens would share similar traits now, making them much easier to create, use, and exchange by everyone on the blockchain. This was a vitally important innovation because it meant now that all applications built on Ethereum could connect to all tokens in the same way. We now had a standardized token methodology, and this would change the game forever. However, big ideas like this tend to take some time. So while the finer details of the ERC20 standard were being fleshed out in the background, a process that took almost 2 full years by the way, in the interim, something else noteworthy was taking place. By 2016, the term ICO was becoming a household name, and one project found out the hard way that ICOs and their respective smart contracts were not something to be taken lightly. Yes, we are talking about the now infamous implosion of the DAO. DAO standing for Decentralized Autonomous Organization. The DAO was meant to act as a collectively managed investment fund for projects built on Ethereum. And the blockchain community obviously liked what they heard because they invested about $150 million US into the DAO's ICO. This nightmare probably deserves its own episode, but in the interest of time, the short version is that before the project could even get off the ground, the DAO was fatally hacked, killing the project and in the process causing a ton of misery and grief for everyone involved. This situation eventually caused a hard fork on Ethereum, which is where we get the Ethereum Classic version from, a blockchain that's still in existence to this day.
So in very short, after we found its locket, we needed money, so we thought about creating a token. But in the process of creating a token, we gave the token holders more and more rights to do things, like even keeping the money in the contract. They would vote on what was happening, and we ended up opening it up for everyone, so everyone could put money in and everyone could ask for money from the DAO, the Decentralized Autonomous Organization. This was the idea. So the DAO raised about $150 million in Ether. So because of this, the Ether price went up. So at some point it was about $250 million. And then there was a hack. was a bug in the smart contract which allowed a hacker to withdraw around 1/3 of the ether in the DAO. And then after that started a crazy time, sometimes called DAO wars. And long story, in the end, there was a hard fork, and now we have Ethereum Classic and Ethereum. And on Ethereum, everybody who would put money into the DAO is able to withdraw his ether. That's the short story, but of course there's much more to it.
Despite the ugly ending to the DAO, it's noteworthy for more than just its stunning display of incompetence. Yes, the project did fail, however, that wasn't because of the 150 million buckaroos it raised in the ICO, something that got a lot of news and headlines at the time. This was a high-profile offering that had some of the biggest names in crypto involved, so the ICO model was here to stay. It just needed some projects to showcase this, projects that enjoyed some success instead of completely shitting the bed. So it's probably a good thing then that by 2017, the long-awaited formalization of the ERC20 token standard finally took place. And this move is likely responsible for the catalyst of all the crazy token creation that followed afterwards, sending the ICO mania into overdrive. Having started in 2012, I was already several years into my cryptocurrency career at this point, and all I can tell you is that once this happened, everything changed. This ended up permanently transforming the blockchain industry almost overnight. Venture capitalists were being left in the dust as founders would go directly to the open markets for fundraising. The captain has please asked you to fasten your seatbelts, ladies and gentlemen, because this ride's about to get a wee bit bumpy. Don't say I didn't warn you, and please hold on tight. ICOs started popping up in droves, with seemingly more showing up on the radar each month. There were so many, in fact, it reminded me of those little furry tribbles in Star Trek that just kept reproducing. And while there were more than your fair share of quickly thrown together, get-rich-quick scheme type of ICOs that were to be avoided at all costs, there were still a few diamonds in the rough. One such example of this is the Wax project that was able to raise $68 million in its ICO offering. But that pales in comparison to the $145 million raised by the Polkadot protocol, which connects blockchains together, allowing users to send value and data back and forth between otherwise incompatible networks. This was a large ICO raise at the time, and it deservingly garnered a lot of attention, but it too was quickly overshadowed by the Tim Draper-backed Bancor project that managed to pull off a much larger ICO in June of 2017. This ICO has historical significance because at the time, it was the highest grossing ICO up to that point. Believe it or not, for all the things that I've done in cryptocurrency, and that's quite a bit at this point, I don't think I've ever actually invested into an ICO. I was probably so focused on my own projects at the time that I just didn't pay attention to these type of events. However, the Bancor ICO, I remember vividly. I was at the Blockchain Government Forum in Ottawa, Canada at the time, and while the official discussion revolved around how blockchain could help governments, the side chatter was about one thing and one thing only: the Bancor ICO, which was taking place later that day. I saw a crowd forming around one of the panels, and when I walked over to discover what was happening, I quickly realized that everyone was talking about the Bancor ICO. When I inquired about it, I was told that the ICO was already over. We had all missed it due to our panel discussions. Bancor raised $153 million in its ICO in just under 3 hours, which, as we discussed, made it at the time the biggest grossing ICO in history. However, Bancor didn't hold on to that title very long because just 1 month later, it was Tezos' turn to make a little bit of history when it came to ICOs. It raised $232 million with its efforts. But Tezos' reign at the top of the ICO mountain didn't last for too long either, because in September, it was the decentralized data storage project Filecoin which took the title itself when it was able to raise $257 million in its ICO efforts. If those numbers sound pretty big to you, it's probably because they are. These are some staggering amounts of money that projects were raising without really having delivered much substance yet. And if you think that these are some crazy numbers, just get wind of what I got to share with you next. Enter EOS, which advertised itself as a realistic alternative to Ethereum. You could run smart contracts on EOS, create subtokens, and do a lot of other cool stuff that was also possible on Ethereum at the time. EOS took a different approach to their ICO, having it start in June of 2017 and allowing it to run for a full calendar year until June of 2018. Okay, so now that you know the backstory to EOS, you're probably wondering just how much money they were able to raise in that year-long ICO campaign of theirs. And I've got the answer for you. A heart attack-inducing $4.1 billion. That just boggles my mind. Suffice to say, 2017 was definitely the height of the ICO bubble. And when all was said and done, over $3.5 billion was raised in ICOs in 2017. Oh mama. All good things have to come to an end eventually, and ICOs were no exception. By the beginning of 2018, they were beginning to lose some of their luster for multiple reasons. First off, regulatory pressure was being applied as China and South Korea basically outright banned ICOs altogether. Meanwhile, the SEC, or Security and Exchange Commission, issued a statement declaring that many ICOs were in fact security offerings, meaning they'd be subject to the same regulations as traditional securities. This statement sent shockwaves to the industry as many projects either canceled or postponed their ICOs due to the fear of risking any kind of regulatory pushback. When the SEC announced it had begun investigations into several projects for potential security law violations, people began to panic. And it didn't help either that the SEC was simultaneously warning investors about the growing list of risks from investing into ICOs. The other big reason that ICOs began to fall out of favor is simply because most of the projects over the past 2 years that had raised crazy amounts of money were now seriously struggling to deliver any kind of real-world utility for their tokens. And this, as you could probably guess, led to a lot of pissed off investors.
An ICO and all the nuances of it, a lot of positive things. Of course, there was a lot of negative things, all the scams, all the money laundering situations that could have happened or did happen. We live on a regulated world, and governments and regulators really got more aware of what's going on with the crypto. What was a big mistake was the incredible amount that the companies raised just because they could. They are down because the expectations in the beginning and the valuations in the beginning were so unrealistic that they can never reach that.
By the end of 2018, the ICO scene had dried up so badly that you began to see articles popping up bemoaning its downfall. The amount of ICOs launching fell off a cliff, and so too did the amount of money that they were raising. The ICO era, for all intents and purposes, was now over. What a wild, wild time to be alive and in crypto. So now you can probably see why the ICO boom was such a pivotal and groundbreaking event in the history of cryptocurrency. Its impact can still be felt all these years later because most of the top crypto projects today got their start via an ICO. And while a lot of investors did end up losing money, quite a few of them did spectacularly well if they picked the right project to invest into. The bottom line here is that this twist on raising capital completely revolutionized the world of crypto and finance along with it. I hope you enjoyed today's stroll down memory lane. Until next time, have fun and enjoy life, my friends. I'll be back soon with another incredible story to tell you.